So you've been working super hard on this song, you're ready to release it, but you ask yourself, is it loud enough? And when you play it next to some of your favorite songs or when you're bumping it in your car before you release it, you wonder, why doesn't it hit quite as loud? And I've released 36 songs in the last 41 weeks. So I know a little something about getting your songs loud enough to sound good enough for streaming platforms. So let me show you what I do to my songs to make sure that they're loud enough and sounding good for streaming platforms. So I recently released this song. I'll give you a little bit of preview.
Yo te dije que yo estaba muy enamorada de tu mirada. Cuando veo tus mensajes, baby, ya tú sabes, vamos pa' la playa.
Tú me dijiste que tú estabas muy enamorada de mi mirada. Como veo tu llamada, me olvido de mis panas. Vamos pa' la playa.
Tú eres mi medicina, baby. I've been thinking about it lately.
So if you don't want to watch this entire video, I'm going to tell you the secret right now. It's knowing how to use an adaptive limiter on your mastering chain. Obviously, there are a lot of different elements and things that are supposed to happen in the mastering process to really get your mix to be that finished product. A big part of that is getting your song to be loud enough. So you may have heard, just as like an industry standard, people say, hey, you probably want your mix to hit around -6 dB. It doesn't necessarily have to hit -6 dB, but the settings that I have set up here in this session that I'm gonna show you are based off of a mix that's hitting around -6 dB before I do anything to the master chain. I feel like that it actually works really well to make sure that your mix is around -6 dB, because then you have room to play with when you're working on your mastering chain. So there's 3 things that I do in my mastering chain that help make my songs feel louder and actually sound louder. There's like actual dB level, which is the actual like mathematical volume, the literal volume of your track. That's something you want to make sure is at a certain level. The other aspect of volume and making your song loud is perceived loudness. So there are things that you can do with frequencies and compression to make your song sound louder without it actually being louder when it comes to the full actual volume happening. The first thing that I do that helps with perceived loudness is I do some dynamic EQ in the mid-range of my song. And depending on the song, I tweak the settings, but essentially I have these 2 bands here and I set them up. You can look at the settings right here. This is exactly how I set them up for this song. And it just does wonders to that mid-range. And it just makes it feel like it's louder, even though we're not really adding a lot of dB to this at all. So let me show you before and after. So this is the raw mix, and this is the first thing I add to my mastering bus.
Yo te dije que yo estaba muy enamorada de tu mirada. Cuando veo tus mensajes, baby, ya tú sabes, vamos pa' la playa.
Now it's really, really subtle at this phase of the process, but adding some of that dynamic EQ in the mid-range, it does wonders for your perceived loudness of your song. The second thing that I do to help with loudness is actually adding a compressor. Now this is the SSL comp. I've covered this in a different video. This has been a recent addition to my mastering chain and I can't live without it. It just adds a little bit more of that glue and compression to the mastering bus. I just use the mastering preset here and sometimes I tweak the attack where I'm at. I like to keep the ratio at 4. That's kind of like the standard. Let me show you what it sounds like on the chain up to that point before and after.
Yo te dije que yo estaba muy enamorada de tu mirada. Cuando veo tus mensajes, baby, ya tú sabes, vamos pa' la playa.
So it just sounds a little bit more glued together, which is going to help so much with perceived loudness. The last thing that I do is actually mess with the loudness, the gain of the actual track, the physical volume knob. And what I do is I add the adaptive limiter from stock from Logic. I use whatever the optimal look ahead time is, which it will give you the recommendation here and you can just hit apply. Typically what I do is I just play through the song and see what it says I should have it at. I set the out ceiling at -0.1 just to make sure we're definitely not peaking and going into the red. And then I mess with this gain knob. And essentially what I do is to know how much I need to add here, I pull up a metering plugin that's called the loudness meter. This is stock inside of Logic. I set my guide here to -9. -9 dB is the recommended volume to kind of hover around. Depending on the streaming platform, some of them take -12 dB, some of them take -14. And so they will always adjust it to kind of match that. But you want to make sure that you're definitely never lower than that. You're going to lose some quality and add some noise. And if you go too far over, then these streaming platforms, they're actually going to compress and squash your song, and it's not going to sound as good as you want it to. So what I find is somewhere around -9 is the safe option, and that's worked really well with all of the songs that I've released. So what I'm doing here is, with the limiter and the loudness meter open, I am playing through the entire song. And at the very least, I'm playing through the loudest part of the song. So we'll just go here to one of the louder parts of the song.
Vamos que hablemos de casa, baby, ¿qué pasa? Noto hace rato que algo te llama. ¿Prefieres paradero o Habana? O no vamos pa' mi tierra Taganga. Baby, que ganga, sentir la arena contigo. Le dejas la sola sentido. Un viaje contigo a San Andrés, lo sueño una y otra vez. Un masaje en el sol como pa' quitarte el estrés. Puro calorcito express, qué preciosa que te ves. Qué rica en la playa contigo.
So you'll notice here that the integrated number is averaging out at around -9 dB. It was a little bit louder in some of the parts, but then a little bit lower. So this integrated meter here is giving you kind of like the average of everything that you've played back. So my average is somewhere around -9, and that's based off of how much gain I added here on the adaptive limiter. If I add more, then this is going to be a lot louder. And if I lower it, this is going to be a lot lower. Essentially what you're looking for is to get this integrated meter to get you at -9. A word of caution: if you crank the gain too much, you may be at the right LUFS level, but it might sound very squashed, and you might be getting some unwanted distortion in your sound. That's where it's really important to use your ears. If you feel like you're cranking the knob here and you're in the right levels when it comes to this meter, and the song just lost its energy and lost its life, then you need to go back and revisit your mix. It means that your mix is not at the right level. Something else might be draining the headroom of your song, and oftentimes it's the bass. And I've actually caught myself doing that sometimes, where I crank the bass way too loud. It's overpowering everything. And so it really stands out when you add a limiter to your song and try to get it loud enough, and realize that because the bass is overpowering everything, you're squashing your mix and really losing the dynamics of your song. And that bass is sucking out all of the loudness that could come from your song. So if you ever feel like that's happening, check your bass, make sure that that's in check. And I promise you, if you actually tone down the bass and then revisit this limiter and the loudness meter, you're going to see that you can reach that -9 dB without having it feel so squashed. So there you have it, guys. Those are the 3 things that I do to make my songs loud enough before I release them to streaming services. I will be covering my current mastering chain. It's also available for download on my website. Link is in the description. If you like this video, make sure to hit that thumbs up. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss future videos. And as always, if you ever have any questions or want to hear more content, check me out on Spotify, Instagram, TikTok. Keep making beats.